And now that we are on recording, we can I can also share the screen and put us on a very boring, fairly blank board / map / diagram, which is blank because it should be used. But to start with a couple of ideas. So from the ways we played earlier, I think those approaches, this sort of layer filter approach in itself is let's say a better starting point, but I thought it might be interesting to make an encounter between it and some of the forms that we have had earlier, including the kind of structure of the dungeon structure. And I mean, and this could be a way to kind of populate of what does these things that have kind of, they have been played, but then they also kind of hovered in high meta levels. But maybe one way to make them tangible is to start playing with them in different forms. So for that idea and the following can be taken very descriptively, doesn't have to be taken seriously. These are rooms, quote unquote. The rooms can be thought of as scenes, as like everything that is happening in a room is co-present. Like, and then setting, unquote, quote unquote, is a dungeon or Megadungeon, meaning it's a way to think about the relations, like passageways to other rooms, etc., to other scenes, essentially. And those can be sort of starting points. But then what can be in these rooms could take from the approaches that we had earlier, this sort of everything that is put here, say, if I put here, and don't lose my text box. If I put here the like something like a roll of a let's say gatherer or mapper. I have some problems. Just a second. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Yeah, because Zoom is currently acting up, but it seems to be finding itself again. So if I make a mapper, I said, this is a kind of it's a layer filter in itself, just like the earlier play. And if I would bring here an image, this could be also in this sort of layer filter. But I also thought about approach where you can kind of think of what's in this mirror board as, well, really like a game board, that you can kind of play on top of it in, roughly speaking, in a kind of role-playing style. But then things that are put here are like playing pieces that can be kind of, you know, notions on the plate, like the roles or certain moves that are in a way saved or marked down into the board. But that style could work in a way of creating this sort of way to play with the discussion, so to speak, and way to play with the map-like potential of the mirror here. So these are certain starting experimental parameters, I guess, for how to start towards this. But that would be a kind of a framework where to play, where to bring this sort of newer playing styles that we have had lately. And I know that's a very cursory a short description, but I try to be now short because I'm usually not. So, any questions, comments so far? I mean, there must be some questions because I was so imprecise.
I missed last session, so I'm walking in a forest of mystery, but I'm trying to follow. So not sure even what the question could be.
I think like I think you're fine in terms of like you have been in few sessions where we use this sort of layer filter like approach, and I think it's mostly thinking of like that approach, but you know, inside a structure, the or quote unquote setting of the sort of dungeon like presence. So that's a starting point. But like inside of this, inside say a room of it, the play could be quite similar than, or in a similar style than we had in the sessions you've been. So I think you're covered on this sense, or at least hopefully. But I thought like on this, I would like to use this sort of combination of like techniques from role-playing side with this board being present. I could start with an experiment of creating a situation in the room. So, and the situation could be this. There is teller, shortening of a storyteller, but doesn't have to be a Tory. So just the teller that tells some situation in itself. There's a mapper. There is, let's say, questionnaire, and there could be gatherer. These are not compulsory. These don't have to be used, but I'm here almost like creating a situation as if a game master creating a situation in itself. And so, and put that into a play possibility. So say as a teller, I could create a situation of, I could create a couple of optional ones and we can see what is interesting. I could say, let's say, imaginings of XORG as an organization. That could be like a starting point. It's almost like the most minimal description of a situation as like a game master. Another branch we could follow, another corridor could be explorations of offers, like, and by that I mean like how to make the form of offer into exotic different forms, and what kind of sights and sounds and weird animals could be found underneath the offer, or something else. But does either of those situations, the imaginings of XORG as organization or the explorations of the offer, sound like interesting starting scenes?
Can you describe more the explorations of the offer?
Yes, this is a good valid way to play. So now you're, in a way,
I'm the questionnaire.
yeah, you're questionnaire, and you're also, we can think of, you're walking down the corridor, but just checking, like you're like going into this corridor that explorations of the offers goes towards, but you're just checking it. For me, it's like what does it even mean, an offer? Like, and if one kind of like intentionally starts to blow it up, like around it, like, okay, you could say, is it like, I mean, we have these words like proposal, application, but on the other hand, we can think of like how every expression or offer is an expression, and in a way, every expression is an offer. Like if I say something, I'm offering something. So could we do something with that? And then secondly, could one think of unconventional ways of offers? Like could one populate that space, like branch out into that corridor and find things that are unusual in around that concept in itself, blow it up. So that's my, now you looked at that tunnel corridor and you saw this overview. You can look further, or anybody else can decide to make other directions or other initiatives.
Yeah, I stand by the door and wait for others to express their ideas.
All right.
I think I'm following that offer idea because it's something a bit more concrete, maybe, or tangible, and a little bit kind of has a bit of a feeling of an external problem rather than looking at the structure that we are ourselves, which usually I find very interesting. But in this case, maybe I prefer that.
So what I make is I just make this other room into explorations of offers, and this is meant to be hacky and very also easy to do as an invitation for anybody to add anything to the structure. This is not, contrary to many role-playing games, this is not like a place or dungeon that I only have the rights to define. But that's this space. And I'll put into this room, this is a scene, I'll put this definition as all are offer, let's say offer like, as, and then I add to this a question. I'll take the role of the questionnaire. So I made an argument and now I'm asking it, how so? I should change to the Finnish keyboard, otherwise I keep on making these mistakes. How so? And maybe I'll add something to that, because otherwise I'm kind of putting you on the spot so much. I'll make a placing words into the air, leaving the reaction to others, which kind of describes an offer-like state. So now this thing is in this quote-unquote room. Of course, other things and other can be added, and anybody can add something. And it's almost like a piece of furniture in a dungeon room. Like it's like a, I don't know, a chair or a table or whatever you think of it. Like you don't have to go to it. Like you might just forget it or leave it aside, but it's there in the room. And that's a thing you see in the room in itself. But you can also create things into this room, but it's like a thought, like you can also go deeper into it.
So is it because of the, I think it's because of the question that we chose to step into, because it is the question that it is, that I can probably occupy a position that is both in-game and meta at the same
Yes.
time,
Yeah.
which would be to say or to ask. Can I ask, by the way, because Pablo has the question.
No, the roles are freely okay. Let's set a setting rule on that. The roles are freely takeable and leavable.
Okay.
They are like seeds, like they are really like filters. Like you can you put them on like glasses and you take them off.
Yeah. So like I could now basically say like everything that has happened from now on, and the rule that you have set for everything to kind of happen from until now, and then the rule that you have set for everything to happen from here on can be seen as offers already so far, right? I mean, from the get-go, if we wish to. And at the same time, we could also say, and I think that's what I'm asking everybody, we can just as well also see them all as layers, can we not?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So basically, we have a kind of a diagram that's translated, that is kind of matrix transformable from one into the other. Could it not be so?
Can you explain that further? So you formed a corridor by your words. I'm intentionally now mixing metaphors because I want to test
I did. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what?
I mean, you did that. You pushed us into the, like Pablo said, let's look into that corridor. I said I would like to, like, and then you said, okay, now we're in that room, explorations of offers. So basically, you pushed us through that corridor, Grace, of Pablo's and my move. And so then you created the room, and so. And now you say, like, let's explore as offers, and this is like where we are now between doing that and kind of reflecting on it, which is super funny, inside out feeling at this moment.
Yeah.
So I mean, I just thought that I think I just said what I said because I felt that they like there appears to be a rather kind of like a similarity between if you can say everything can be perceived as an offer. And let me think. I mean, there's this this kind of next to one another type of existence, no? That they have. I mean, I don't know. Oh God, I think I need to stop. Otherwise,
No, it sounds interesting. Like which things are next to one another?
Maybe I'm already thinking the offer in a layer way.
Okay.
I think that's maybe because we've been training ourselves to think layer in the past sessions. So like, I think the image that this kind of at the same time non-destructive coexistence of layers with one another, and the way in which they are, so to speak, destructive since they preclude other options that may have been possible previous to their coming into existence. So like now, I think maybe that is the kind of a bit the temporality with which I look at offers. So I'm not looking at offers as like, okay, so that thing is the acute trigger or stimulus to respond to, but the corridor which you described, the room that you pushed us to, the room we began with prior to Pablo answering the first question, these in this layer temporality still kind of resonate as offers. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. You would be completely right. In a way, like I could say that I didn't really push you in the room in a way you came to the room, but you could also go out of the room. You could even create a new room. But
I think you drew the line under that having happened.
yes, I sort of did. But in a way, like you could resist it and go somewhere else. That's a possibility, just to make that notion.
But I think maybe what would be interesting to point out is, like, if we speak of an offer, isn't that usually something that is, you know, acute now and then open for a limited amount of time, and then at some point it's not an offer anymore. It's the offer gets closed, like removed, or how? What does an offer do? It gets
the offer
no
is an
more.
offer until it's taken, no?
Until what?
Someone takes the offer, no?
I think both are possible. Like it's conventional that offer is open for some time, but there's also offers that are just open. Like in a way, like if you're selling anything, like or if you're a cafe is making an offer of coffee, and if the cafe is open for decades, or then the offer is always there in a way. Like, and it's possible to think about that.
Right.
And also, sorry, if the offer is unrealistic in some sense, like, you know what I mean, if the offer is something that no one takes because it's, you know, because it's so open.
Yeah.
Or it's dangerous, or
it's dangerous.
What I was trying to maybe just to try and make that kind of try that thought, what I was saying, like that the offer kind of brings with it maybe a sense of like, it's now that I ought to respond. But whether it's me walking past the cafe, whether or not that offer extends for, you know, relative eternity in comparison to my life or not, but it's me in that moment being in front of that cafe, meaning being in front of the offer, that I can respond to it or not, right? Whereas
okay, yeah,
you see where I'm going, like, so like, so you have the offer would be kind of a, you know, like a marker on a progressive timeline that kind of happens now, whereas maybe the layering mode has a little bit more of this, you know, I can move up and down the stack of layers, I can move, you know, crisscross any of them. So this is why I was saying this, like, maybe I'm looking at the offer in a layering way. Because had we maybe not spoken in the past weeks about the layers, I would have said, okay, so now Pekko just made that offer. What do we do? But I consider the corridor that you made and those all kind of resonant offers in the way. So maybe the temporality is one of the things that changes between these two modes.
Yeah, I've actually taken the liberty of adding, well, several things. Also Linda's unrealistic and others there, but I add the temporality and the moment of the offer, and I put them close to the all expressions are offer like, or actually I put them close to the sentence underneath, that the placing the words in the air, that there is a temporality when somebody's speaking to you. Like when somebody says a comment to you, then it's also offer like in the sense that Martin is describing, that there is like a moment to it. So that is an interesting connection in itself. So now there starts to be furniture in this room, or equipment, or call it whatever. Like now since we're storming this, we have a lot of freedom of how we treat this. We could keep the freedom for later as well, but so this room is populating itself. I'm kind of like, I like, for the current playtest, you can do something else, but I like that they are kind of like furniture in the sense, like now you can add new ones, or you can kind of visit deeper one of them, which is a little bit like somebody going and examining the table or doing something with the table. And of course, all of these are now layer filters. Like they are layer-like, they can be turned off, on, put next to each other. They're filter-like, that they can be taken as affecting each other, like filters to each other, etc.
But so basically, we're now operating live with two modes at the same time, aren't we?
Yeah, yes, that's the idea.
Yeah, right. So basically,
plus
then I
meta.
could. What?
Kind of three, 2 modes plus meta.
But the meta, I think, is already completely caught up in,
Sort of, yes. Yeah.
It's
2.5.
Exactly 2.5
Yeah,
D.
Yes.
It's thoroughly tainted.
Yeah. But that's also the kind of the idea, like I'm not saying we're locked into these 2 modes, but also like there is this interesting modality, because there's like in the discussions on the nature of meta at this point, that when you're playing something, even traditional board game, and the board is front of you, there's always the discussion over the board that can affect the play. And the more the play plays with meaning, the more the conversation kind of takes part, but it's also meta to the game. And this is just putting that into the game itself, sort of, or into play at least. Okay, Jakub created an interesting, I would think of it almost like a cabinet slot as a nested subwoofer. I'll explore this cabinet. Add to your offers as having an inherent nesting capability. So there can be offers within offers. So let's say somebody's offering to make a party, but then part of it is that they need a DJ. So there is an inherent offer of also, could you even general you be the DJ? So that's kind of showing to inherent nesting capability. And what I was thinking here is also, I'll, as a questionnaire, I'll make a question. Can other expressions nest? That's very vague, but the point being, like, can we think of nesting in a conversation? And I do think it's possible. I think nesting happens in conversation when somebody says something, and then you pick on when you said that, and then you almost start like a branch pathway, like a tangent of the conversation, and you start talking about the certain phrase within the comment that somebody made. And that is a kind of a nesting in itself.
I mean, the German language is notorious for that, isn't it?
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah, or like, hang on, I need to find his name. Austrian writer. I look him up. It absolutely can.
Part of a comment and delving. So I put it there as an idea. So this is, of course, mutilating the cabinet, but that's what can happen, like inside even a dungeon. When somebody puts something, if it's like an object, it's almost like, wouldn't say defenseless necessarily, but somebody can go and do something with the cabinet, like pull off the shelves, and that's kind of what's happening here.
I mean, one layer that we haven't really pointed to, even though it's put in use is, or also offer, I don't know, is this metaphor of the furniture. No, I mean,
yeah,
that comes a bit with the mega dungeon
yes,
idea, but it's kind of, it's not expressed, it's not written down in letters on that digital board, but it is definitely affecting the geometry of the space, no, and also the size of objects that they get, and like, I'm just trying to.
agreed. I actually put like in this room. Once I get this box looking a bit more normal. Whoa. I'll
Just as a kind of furnishing move. Maybe I made a carpet now. I don't know what it is.
So in this room I made. Now in this room there is the role offerer, which I don't know if people have used, but it's now a possibility. And then there is a type called furniture, which I think has been kind of forming here, as Martin said. So they are present in this room as availability, not as something that one must use, but it's a possibility. And the one thing to highlight also in terms of this sort of play testing and play possibilities is we're at the same time creating a room and a sort of a board. Like you can think of it as a game board, and of course a sort of a diagram, because the game board is almost like between a room and a diagram in a way. Like and of course room is something that could be, you know, revisited. Like if we moved away from this room and say created another room, we could come back to this room. All of these possibilities is in the room perspective, but we can also move to the board perspective, like thinking how this plays, like putting things that are almost like game rule like here is a role offerer and type furniture, is more like looking at it like a board, because it's like writing rules into it, but like both things are possible.
Hey, but excuse me, I might be completely crushing a thought here. Am I just understanding something that was kind of at stake the whole time, or is it something really low level or high level or wherever it is? But like I just have to think that like basically now, or like not basically, I don't know, this is a question. Like what is happening now? Is it a bit like we could switch? Are we kind of testing what a thing looks like? And by thing, I mean not like, you know, conventional object, but like a thing like what we're doing here, or the game or the conversation. So once we switch it, so to speak, transform it or reconfigure it from one kind of paradigm of seeing it to another paradigm of seeing it, as in like, so now we could take everything that we've been talking about since the record went on as in the mega dungeon relationship, you know, kind of skeuomorphic, you know, quasi natural space pressed to 2D with these types of connect. We could also switch the kind of paradigm and look at all of it as offers. And then we look at everything that is there as offers. We can also switch the kind of display, so to speak, of everything that has now happened as layers.
Yes.
And then we discover it as layers. Was that kind of what you were trying to do, 2 sessions ago, like when we ran into this bit intense discussion there, or like one last session? Because this, I kind of, it makes me think a bit of kind of, and actually I will stop this because it might flatten the thought. But this I kind of, because then you can kind of walk up and down your own structure or your own gameplay, and see where a new kind of door folds out, or like door would then, to be speaking in the mega dungeon metaphor, or a new offer would fold out, or a new layer would open itself, basically by switching representation, paradigmatic representation.
Exactly this. Like this is why yattered on about perspective, like taking like purely or close to as possible purely perspectivistic approach.
Yeah,
like
yeah, it's a rendering almost, like it's a, how do you say it? Like it's like you have an underlying. I know I'm not going to make any comparisons, but because they would just flatten exactly what we're talking about.
It's also like, but I think you're completely describing it quite well. Like like if you take a purely perspectivist approach, wherever mode you're in is like there are all these modes available. Like you can be in the dungeon or look at it as layers or offers or as a diagram. But these are just perspectives. Like you can also think of them as filters or lenses that you put on. Like you have this lens set in your pocket.
Super interesting.
And one of them is the dungeon. And it's now when I put the dungeon lens on, I find something interesting and you delve into that direction.
Super interesting.
Or you find something interesting in the offer direction, so you go from that perspective. Like this is the interesting thing about the kind of quirky and weird, but I think rather powerful idea of like purely perspectivistic. Like things are defined by the perspective. They are. There is no is or is not. There is just a point to look at it. Like now I'm looking at it's a dungeon, so therefore it's a dungeon now. But I could switch immediately and look at it as a board or layers.
But what I think is super fascinating about that is that it kind of appears that if you do that and you say, okay, now I have an issue here with my company or something like that, and I draw it up as a dungeon, I draw it up with, you know, connections between rooms or so and so stuff, and then okay, what can I pull out of that? You know, then here could be an opening, and then I just stretch that out.
Yeah,
and then you don't get further at some point and say, okay, well, let me draw that as layers then, and then you see it as layers, and okay, so here's an interesting multiplication happening or so, and then you say, okay, so what about if this is offers or if it's rights? And it feels as if you kind of you'd come to this kind of you would this kind of permission of multidimensionality.
Yeah. And I just made a couple of rooms where there's no currently access. I could have put the access, but I just didn't yet, or I thought it's interesting, maybe didn't. And one of them is this perspectivism. Font larger, and they're just available. Like one could go into those rooms and concentrate on them as well as a possibility. Jakub, since you have to run, do you have one? I mean, you made texts, but do you have a vocal contribution? I would be interested if you would have some. We can do a midway summary.
Yeah, I guess so. Since I also missed some of the sessions and didn't yet get to watch all of them, so I'm kind of rewarming my brain to the relations between layers and lenses and filters, and yeah. So I guess just exposing myself to the conversation mostly at this point.
Yeah, that's okay. Like no problem.
And kind of reviving. Yeah, I guess I want to, or I need to do a more systematic rehash for myself of like the precise definitions of the offers and rules and the relations. So I will be going through the Miro board today, I guess.
Yeah, in a way, like it's this for the offers. This is definition generation. Like it's precisely like not necessarily looking at like coming with one definition, which would be kind of narrowing way, but it's almost looking the opposite, like blowing it up. Because like to actually look at like this room, if one thinks of it as a kind of generator itself, like is a way to blow up the offer to see other possibilities around it. So yeah.
It also reminds me a bit to some approaches or like some phenomenological methods, let's say, where we focus on some kind of like pre-concept or phenomenon, which in this case would be offer, whatever that might mean, and then like doing the different stages of the exploration, like the free imaginative variation, so kind of overlaying different perspectives or angles or manifestations of the phenomenon, and then kind of blowing up what it can be and kind of explicating the different, not components, but yes, I would also need to refresh my understanding of the phenomenological methods, but it kind of brings my mind back there also to the work of I think it was called practical phenomenology of Don Ihde. Yeah, anyways, I can share the link. I'm not sure how relevant it is, but it kind of brings me to want to read more and refresh those approaches to conceptualization.
There is a bit of like certain branches of phenomenology present here, although it's maybe turned to experimentality and kind of taken further in the sense of experimentality.
That's actually the book. It's called Experimental Phenomenology.
Okay.
I forgot the thing.
Yeah. So maybe one adds it here into the room. So there is a book. I would invite anybody to like, you don't have to do this, but like make an overview of like or really actually maybe I should not force it, like any other moves, overviews, or whatever you would want to do. I could open the table for that.
I started drawing some lines with the hopes of being a mapper, but then I realized that more than a mapping, I guess the lines in this sense are more of a teller situation, because you have to construct a narrative to explain the ideas behind the lines, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to connect some of the things that you've been saying, thinking of offers in terms of potentiality and actuality, and how they capture potentiality in a way that you can manipulate it as an object. So it brings potentiality to actuality. I don't know. I'm struggling to place it in temporal terms. So I guess I will place it as a question. How do offers, as objects that describe potential outcomes, what is happening in terms of time? Are they frozen and then they get activated? Are they? Yeah, that's my question.
I'm sorry, I just say hi and jump off. So thank you.
Yeah. See you later.
Bye bye.
Yeah.
See you.
Just a short comment. Actually, one of my playtesting scenarios was role combinations, like to make a room that is simply thinking of like, it's a mapper plus teller, that I start as a mapper and then I move to teller and then I maybe finish with questionnaire, and what you can do with this sort of like almost like series of roles. So I put in the first room where we started the role combinations as a category, like just as, but it was kind of one possibility that was on my mind when I was thinking about the structure, but I thought like it's kind of specific, and it was better to start with the, let's say, more general. But it's certainly like what you're talking about is certainly a possibility in the whole, and it's almost like, in a way, almost like a machine or engine in a way. Like anyway, but with your question was good. But I'm also talking too much. Maybe somebody else wants to engage with your question here.
I mean, to me, it looks like as a mapper, you're actually offering a view into the office,
Mhm.
because you are almost offering a path for understanding this system,
Yes.
the temporality, the order. So again, temporality, and I wrote urgency as well, because what drives someone to make an offer? Because you could potentially offer anything. So when does an offer become an offer and not just a proposition? Or so there's probably some urgency or some need behind the offer's launch, sort of.
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm thinking that could be like also this last comment, that when an offer is made, there is a urgency, desire um, um, of something, like it, or motivation at least. Like
Yeah.
um, um, I'll make a, like this could combine into something else, but I'll just make it now separate. Like um, offer as a carrier or vessel of uh, motivation, desire, urgency. That's it. And then I also took your, no, don't do that. Okay, now I'm more on the safe side. I also placed your offer a view into offers as a subtitle to the room title. Not that rooms have to have titles, but just to play around with this idea, and that I thought it's an interesting as a room subtitle. So I played that there. There, like to just to point out to another possibility, because this is kind of like a room and like a board. Like let's say after its generation, somebody could edit it, like reorganize the room and maybe make a copy of the room, or like maybe in the interest of making it more like a board to play, or maybe in the interest of making it more like a room to explore, or diagram, whatever the interest would be. So of course this is a possibility that clearly opens as well, like from here. Um, but if I play now as kind of a player coming to this board or room, or maybe both, I'm having both lenses on, like red and the green lens. I'm looking like this is actually doing what it was sort of thought to do, which is like exploding the offer. Like in a way, like the offer view into offers is almost kind of an answer to this, all expressions are offer like, how so? Like this is an expression, but it's an offer as well. Like it's not the answer, but it's an answer. And then there is the perspective of offer as a vessel of motivation, desire, urgency. But then there is also this offer in a layer way, and like how there is this sort of non-destructive, like compared to say an argument or a claim. It's something that comes to there for the others to react. And then there is this whole nesting that inside an offer there can be an offer. And if I'm here as a player, I could think of it this as a mind room. So it's like almost like an abstract room that I can walk or spend time with each of these parts, and then well, contemplate them or produce more out of them. Like maybe I decide to spend time with this idea of the nested structure, and how how it kind of relates to conversation or whatever, or I could spend time with the layer or whatever direction, or I could take this sort of offers that are unrealistic and dangerous, which is there waiting, almost like a sketch. So this for me is kind of forming how this can be like a room in one way, like and I thought it's interesting to point out this possibility. So actually, I noticed that there is the desire urgency is happening in the middle parts of the room. So I add this there, closer to those. So, but from here, I could kind of return to this sort of game master position a bit and ask from you, like, now that we have kind of introduced this approach, this sort of, maybe it's a meta dungeon, not a mega dungeon, or it's meta dungeon, of layers and filters. Where would you want to go from here? Like any direction,
Pekko.
small or large?
Pekko, could you say that one more time? It's a meta or mega dungeon of layers and filters. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
I don't understand maybe that part.
I would say that it's slightly metaphorical and poetic. Like, which part? Like the meta part or the dungeon of layers or filters?
No, the way in which these kind of structures relate in that sentence that you just said.
Like the mega dungeon and the dungeon of layers and filters.
Yeah, the dungeon of layers and filters. I mean, that's certainly interesting because it's a kind of, rather than kind of a shape shifting under the paradigm of perspectivism, it's a bit kind of hybridizing the two, which is fun enough, I guess.
It wasn't like a super serious definition of things.
No.
It was more like descriptive, and mostly maybe the interest was to serve the kind of both views. Like practically what we're sort of doing is to bring the layers and filters approach to a kind of dungeon-like structure. We're doing other things as well, the perspectives and so on, but that's certainly present. So I just wanted to highlight that it wasn't more serious than that.
And could you like, is that do you say that because this is what kind of, so to speak, biographically is now happening with this group, or is it so that you say this because we are applying layer logic to we're just more carrying it with us, right? That's what you mean to say. We've been spending time with it to understand it, and now we kind of drop it on. Okay, yeah, I get you.
Yeah. And that's the kind of game we're in. Like,
yes.
Yeah,
I get you.
like, yeah. But it's also like
it's also funny, this kind of resonance thing, or like not resonance, but this kind of like you step out of a puddle and your shoes are still wet.
Yes, like wait a minute. The metaphor was sort of, okay, what's the deeper meaning of the you step out of the puddle, but your shoes are still wet?
I mean, like, so like, let's say I fell into a pond and I step out and I'm kind of still dripping wet. That's kind of where we've been for the past weeks in the layer exploration, and now we take that to the dungeon mode.
Yes, definitely that kind of an approach, and it's very much in this sense of playtesting or playstorming, that it's almost like all the approaches are on the table. Like if you would try to make a game out of it, you could maybe say, okay, let's not have all of them on at the same time. It's maybe too many possibilities. But for testing, it's interesting to, and for the sense of possibilities, it's interesting to open all the possibilities at once, so to speak. But if I now take this overview, I'm flying above the dungeon. I can point out, like, first of all, like, I think the whole, like, having these lenses of it being like a space or almost like an architecture, like dungeon, and then being in this sense of like maps made out of this layer filter things, or game boards made out of layer filter things. It's an interesting and I think rather fertile combination already, like from this early testing. And as like as in direction, I think it holds a lot of potential. So that was me looking at the dungeon from the high view. And I did that from the role of a gatherer. I gathered together. I didn't have an earlier meaning for the gatherer, but now the gatherer became in this position, the one who gathers something out of the whole.
I think that's an interesting example of a layer. It kind of imposed itself at the beginning and stuck, like, and it's been kind of working on your mind the whole time until you turn out to, oh yeah, it's a gatherer now. So it's been present in a way the whole time.
Yes. I'll make a back room to this room. It's a secret room.
It was an offer, and now it's been taken, defined.
Yes.
Can you draw a book cabinet in front of that?
Somebody can. Like, my hands are tied.
I'm a former woodworker. I will do my room.
This is not the best name I could think of, but I just wanted to create the room, back room, because it's also a kind of, at the same time, an example of this whole thing. Like it's that thought, but then putting it as a back room, and then somebody comes up with the idea of a book cabinet, and I'll put here maybe that there is potentially a secret entrance from the book cabinet. That's a possibility to think about. Like, then inside the book cabinet there could be a small text that describes it, and that's the secret entrance to this back room that is constantly present in the room itself. But another kind of point from the gatherer overview is that what it's also creating, and of course now it's creating it kind of experimental sketching form, but what it's creating is a map that can be wandered by, well, the players who played it, but really anybody else, that then has this sort of, I mean, it's potentially infinite, like you could just keep on drawing on it. But it's also like that map is organizing this sort of states and contemplative points. It's really, you could think of like somebody else almost like bringing themselves here, and then they would wander into this room, and they would wander to think about the nested subwoofer, and then they would walk from there towards the offer as a vessel of desire and urgency. So it's visitable in itself. If you would put rules or ops or whatever one calls, which of course can be here as well, they could also be part of these things. Like you could have like, I don't know, like a simple one-word key, like make an answer to this question, and there would be a question. But of course, it could be something more complicated. But of course, the structure can take such things as well.
What are the forms that we have now, or like, how do we call them? Forms or modes that we have now been talking about, like over the whole time. So there's the kind of the mega dungeon or mega dungeon thing. Then there is the layer filtering thing. Then what other modes did we have?
I'll put board, like a game board. I'll put.
I mean, the offer counts. Does it count as, because the offer used to be a kind of a sub element in the XORG list of candidates? No, I mean an important one, but like I wonder, like on the track that we are now, could it not almost be like, I mean, if we talk about this shape-shifting thingy, right? Then everything could be like, you know, everything, I don't know, but like a lot of like things could be seen as like in layering perspective, they could be seen in dungeon perspective, or they could be seen as offers. They could also probably be seen as rules across the board, right? I mean, one could. So I'm just wondering, like, what are those main? How do we call these? Are these modes, or you wrote modes now also, or perspectives, or?
I mean, this is the kind of twisty part of perspectivism. Like in a way, like one should say yes to everything you say, because if something is perspectivist, you can take it as offers, or rules, or layer filters, or game boards, or dungeons, and because that's how perspectivism works.
It's a kind of any type situation.
Yeah. But on the other hand, like in a way, like you can say inside the game, like here's the perspectives that we propose. Like say we propose like a dungeon and maybe a game board or whatever they are.
So you select.
It's almost like a lens set in the maybe at the doorway. It's like here's a couple of lenses, and take them with you. So it's also a possibility to narrow it down in and of itself.
I don't understand why the game board is in there. I don't understand how I could see everything at a how I could see you, Linda. Sorry for that.
Oh, you have to. Linda, do you have a last comment or?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's all offering a room, offering a map, offering a secret entrance. It's and the temporality is just yeah, I don't know how to say it, but I'm thinking about it. Quite interesting, the potential.
Yeah, it's
constitutes as well.
Yeah, I think it's of course hard to now be concise because it's opening up to so many directions. I think the key thing is like you can always narrow it down, and when you narrow it down, you can get certain effects out of it. But like potential is a good point of starting to narrow down, because it means that you have like a rich soil and you could grow it this way or you could grow it that way. Depends on how you want to garden. Like as like a design soil, it's a very rich one, and that's maybe the key for me, like a key thing of the playtesting also.
Yeah, and we were talking about gardening, weren't we, in the last
Yeah,
were not
yeah.
last a few sessions ago.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah.
definitely what it feels like. And I feel like it's easier to pin down than once you have so much.
Yeah.
Then it's harder to come up with so much and keep them pinning down. It's, it's fairly easy on one side.
Yeah, at some point we should do a playtest that is a little bit more narrowed down, because I have this habit of like opening all the possibilities at once, which is maybe useful, but also like gets kind of like everything is an explosion kind of situation. So
But it's cool. I like that because it gives me loads of thoughts.
But yeah,
Thank you so
thanks.
much.
Yeah.
Hope you're well. See you next week.
See you.
Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao. But to Martin, your comment that you said like you don't know how to look at it as a game board, or what did you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I can imagine taking an organizational issue like puzzle, like an organizational question that I have to solve, for example, and I fold it through these different kind of modes. I say, okay, now I look at it as kind of a mega dungeon type of diagram. Now I look at it as a layering thing. Now I look at it as an offer relationship. I can look at it as a rights. I can look at it as rules. I'm not sure. Maybe we haven't, or I haven't spent enough time with this perspective of the game board that I could say, okay, I know how I could fold it into that mode.
I think, yeah, I think it's like if you imagine this sort of, I don't know, like a Euro.
Is that a process diagram then? Is a game board more like a process diagram with kind of attached kind of opportunities and stuff? It's a bit of a mixed form, is I guess what I'm trying.
And it is kind of like game boards are like that. If you think of like this sort of Euro style board games,
yeah,
they're kind of process diagrams in like, the one thing that I thought like that opens up from this game board is precisely this, like if I add it to this rule, role of an offerer or a type of furniture, they are more like rule-like things, and on a game board that's kind of normal, like that these kind of things can happen, like, oh, there is like rules for this context, etc., and kind of natural to think about it in this way. And also, like from the game board perspective, you could start to think like, okay, how do I move here? And maybe it's interesting to move is like, you could even start playing this in the manner that, okay, everybody selects the starting point. Okay, I start from the slot as a nested sub offer, and I start kind of building upon it. Like, and that direction could offer a whole nother perspectives, not to explode things again, but certainly could. Like what if we play this as a board game? Like, okay, I make my fortress in the offer as coexistence, and I start building around it, and like, what are the rules of building them? And, you know, like there it goes, that pathway.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
But to your like, and maybe moving to kind of bringing kind of gathering points towards some kind of summation is like like in terms of how would you do an organization. I like one way to think about it is like there's of course once again gazillion ways, but let's put a couple of like useful ways. It's like, okay, let's say you have certain iterative repetitive patterns, like you always have these meetings and you have this particular room where people work and where the development happens, whatever it is, and then you make them dungeon rooms, for example, and then those also can behave like board games. Like, wait a minute, let's think about our meetings as kind of like a room, and then we can also think about it like board games. It's like, and that allows to say open up new design directions of how that meeting happens. Like maybe we have now a meeting where actually people play like a board game and build around topics. Like somebody starts to host or build their village or whatever into the topic of whatever is in the meeting. and what kind of processes could open up from there. But you can also look at it as a dungeon room. Like, I'm already opening too many possibilities.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
But
very interesting.
But that's like maybe that in that example, to kind of pull back a bit from opening too many possibilities, this starting point of starting practice of making the things that are iterative into rooms, and then populating those rooms maybe fairly freely, but then looking at the things that people have put there maybe as almost like brainstorming, like putting things down, but then there are layer filters, and then turning it into, say, board game view, or that is already a process then one could use. And that could be useful as a process, like step by step, of going from putting things that people know, oh, we have these meetings, we have this development room, etc. Easy way of putting stuff down, oh, in the meeting room we have this practice and we have these topics and so on. Still easy. But then at that point, switching now let's organize it like a board game, and let's bring in that the mechanic is construction and like a, not conquest, but like a map, like that people are in different areas, and let's play around. And now you're opening it to unconventionality, and you move the framework of thinking upon the things that are kind of traditional into a different kind of thinking.
A funny thing I think with the board game is that you basically what one thing that happens is that you kind of you enrich the kind of different spots on the game, and then you confine in turn yourself and all players kind of to certain positions, kind of by physically locking them in a spot. So that's an interesting, because at the other things more or less you look in a map type of mindset, don't you?
Yeah,
like the dungeon, you're present more in a map type of way.
Yeah, that is actually a good. I'll put the map on the modes list, because the map is different enough from the game board, and
I think the map is closer to me. In my understanding, it would be closest to the dungeon, even though the dungeon has this kind of idea of kind of emergence in a way. It kind of is created over time, right? Whereas the map is kind of there, and you have kind of omnivision.
I would agree with you. The one interesting thing about the dungeon is that it's a weird straddling between being a map, being kind of a game board, and being even a kind of a diagram.
Yeah.
Because the corridors are edges, and the rooms are nodes, and it's kind of touching upon all of them, which kind of makes it an interesting starting point in general.
I think an interesting distinction between the dungeon and the map is that I can see a map describing the dungeon, but not the other way around. Like if I were to draw a map of this dungeon, I would call this maybe the offer room, but not describe maybe so much what's inside of it, right? Like that's the dungeon. The map is not the territory, I guess it's what I'm saying. But it does, because of the way we're navigating it, because we are in a 2D zenithal view kind of perspective, it feels more like a map. So I'm wondering if it's more productive to be inside a dungeon in a 3D space. It's dark, there's torches, and maybe some more skeuomorphism is in place, like the bookshelf kind of makes sense. Maybe, I'm thinking of tools of space creation that aids in the mental image of a dungeon as a confined location, I guess.
Yeah, it becomes more situational in that sense, and a bit more kind of cognitively limited.
Yeah, I think in what you're saying, Pablo, there is an interesting way of thinking about these differences. Like yes, in a map you would describe that this is the offer room, and then in a dungeon you would put like traditional dungeon, you would put, let's say, all the stuff that is there, and they're kind of like game pieces, but kind of like real pieces. Like they're in the dungeon, you would put like there's a chair and a table and a cabinet, but why you put them there is because they're to be played with. It's like they're real objects in the dungeons, but they are also game objects. And that's the straddling nature of the dungeon. Again, it's like a cabinet in a dungeon is supposed to be a cabinet, but it's also supposed to be a game object that is supposed to make the game interesting. It's like the where you find the document that or the key which gives you the access to the door, which is more the game board style of things. But game board is even more purely that it can contain something that is just a rule, like an abstract description, and that's okay on a game board. It's not really in a dungeon usually. And this difference between map, dungeon in between, and the game board, I actually ordered the modes in that order after your comment, because that kind of makes sense as a way of thinking.
I'm thinking of the very interesting relationship in video games between maps and dungeons, and sort of like how within the framework of a dungeon, the map is an item that you find in the dungeon, and this map has sort of like a certain intelligence over the dungeon it describes. Nevertheless, you can only access the map through the dungeon. And even though the map describes everything or a certain amount of it, it is only found in a very specific location within the dungeon. I don't know, like this seems to me relevant in the sense of more to be explored in the connection of maps and dungeons, and how one becomes the other, and the item and the description, and yeah, sort of like goes back and forth in a meta way that seems very relevant.
Yeah, this is a whole direction of possibility that I didn't want to explode, but just to point out, like I put just as almost like an example in this offer room, a role of an offerer, which kind of gives the sense that the role of the offerer is available in that room. But of course, the possibility is like even you could put it in any area. You could put it in the so-called cabinet. That suddenly in this cabinet, certain rules or roles or whatever is available in that area. Like you can put it as small as a frame as you want it, really. So that's kind of connecting a little bit with your thought that you can find a map in a certain location, but you can find even an abstract capability, a move to be made in a certain location as well. So the why I didn't bring that strongly in, because it's like I already have this illness of just opening possibilities, and that's yet another way of opening possibilities, but it's definitely there and it's definitely interesting. So yeah, that's but I think as a form, I think it's really interesting in this sense of I think it's like a raw gemstone. That it could be faceted and polished in many ways, and of course it can be polished multiple times. Like so, for example, the pathway I just drafted out of it's traditional organization. Let's make the normal iterative events and places into rooms, and then let's put the stuff there that happens there into the room, and then let's change into a board game style, and maybe we have certain models of the board game already. That's a way to facet the jewel. That's like cutting the raw gemstone into a shape. And then that's probably much more approachable, but you could cut it in other ways as well. And then, so I'm also making excuses for my habit of always bringing the raw forms and present, but also pointing out how then one can take this further also by cutting, by contouring, by limiting. But I also like, there is this idea which this brings, that this is sort of bringing out this sort of image or a sense of an abstract dungeon or meta dungeon in a way. it's behaving like a dungeon, like a real place, but it's also behaving like this sort of, what would it be if, say, a text would be in a dungeon form? We're already kind of covering that kind of an area, which is interesting direction as well. I'll actually make a room for it, just to remember. But yes, it's of course it's this sort of infinity of the mega dungeon that is around us. But if we kind of bring our delving into a closure, so we descended down into the first room, so saw certain features, and then went by one corridor into another room. There were some other rooms that we had awareness of, but maybe no pathway there yet. But like, any thoughts of closure from either of you?
I would just invite us to go back to this dungeon at some point.
Yeah.
You mean this inside view of it?
Yeah, like come back here. To this
Also,
place.
this one, yeah, to this map.
Yeah. I think, yeah. And it also can be, like, one can also reorganize, and like if one wants to change something, we can even make a copy of it, but also of course add and find other rooms in itself. I think revisit would be good, because I think it kind of, like, when the thought is processed a bit, like, I think clarity comes, and there might come approaches and ideas that take the idea further.
What I think is really interesting, and that just came up now in the end, in a way, by way and grace of the game board, and then by what Pablo said, of the view we take or not take of the dungeon, is this kind of placing ourselves and our I, or the question of, like, or the way in which we place ourselves or our I, or mental I, onto these structures that we have been now exploring. Because, like, far as I remember, we have basically been looking at things kind of structurally, like, but we have not really considered any other view on them than the kind of God's view, right? And I mean, now that Pablo brought up the way in which one could think of oneself as in the dungeon, or then the way that the game board locks a player's figurine or figurines onto a certain spot, and kind of how do you say that, imposes action.
Yeah, positions.
On base of that, like, from out of that location. That's something that we haven't, like, for example, for the idea of the layer filter, we haven't tried that at all.
No.
And we haven't also tried that so much with offer. I think today there came a couple of, because the offer is maybe more dependent on time than on space, at least in a game situation, but maybe also not. But we haven't really kind of questioned that in a kind of perspectival, not perspectivist, because that's what I think we've been doing. But perspectival, we haven't really gone to. And I think if we now, because I always have this kind of question in the back of my mind, obviously, of how then to use all these things that we're talking about as, or how to kind of fold them into thinking about organizations. I think this idea of beginning to start to think of organizations as kind of in a game board way, meaning you see how does this whole thing look once I have to put myself through this whatever structure, layer, filter, structure I now envisioned, but as a perspective, what happens then? Or when I look at it as a dungeon, what happens when I put myself into that? So that I think is actually super interesting, because it's kind of a high, how did you call it, Pablo? Zenith, from the Zenith.
Yeah, zenithal view.
Yeah, that's the main view we've been taking, right? I mean,
yeah, agreed. I actually also added to the modes the mode of a player figure position.
Yeah. I think that's mega interesting, and even as a kind of mind bender. No, I mean, we're still trying these same structures, but just like, what do they look like when one lowers oneself to the ground and ground, quote unquote.
Yeah, not to open another can of worms, but I will just peek into it a bit, like how board games have this. They have this player position, but then they have many ways. Like the player is actually like 7 villagers, and they are at different places. Like this game is played that you get 7 villagers and you place one on the farm and one on the ranch and whatever it is, and one on the I don't know, guild hall, and that is kind of player position as well.
Sure.
But like one doesn't have to go that far. I do think, and I kind of agree with what you were saying, if I kind of read you correctly, that there is a certain almost dramatic to this sort of being inside, and it's a really interesting, like just being like a player, like I'm here kind of sense.
Yeah, I mean, also kind of, I mean, in a way, like if I, as you said, you made the example. No, if I think of a certain, processes in an organization or certain even structures, like organizational structures in an organization, then like we do, like tendentially, all of what we've been looking at has been seen as diagrams, even if it's not like node edge type diagrams, but our relationship to the structures and the way we've been talking about it has pretty much been that. So I don't know if I want to use the word immersive, but like like placed into maybe. We haven't really tried.
Or like very little. I kind of agree. It's been like little there, but it's like an interesting possibility precisely because of this perspectivism. And I actually moved the molds to a small room that is connected to the first room, and I'm calling it anteroom of perspectivism. And I can tell you, as like a game master position, teller position, that there's this sketchy like a plug, like the stone plug, like a sign. I don't know how you pronounce that word, but and in the stone there's like hastily carved, but kind of sloppily carved, this modes, this text that is here, like map diagram, Megadungeon, which has kind of the furniture mode, the game board, that's rules functionality, and then these other things.
Is there never any kind of pastel colors in dungeons?
I mean, sure, you can put anything. Like you can say now that this has pastel colors, this room.
Yeah, I think that one has pastel color.
It could have, like, it tries to be welcoming, so maybe it's pastel color in this way. I still think, like, it should.
I didn't say welcoming, Pekka, I just said pastel color.
I know, I added the welcoming. And I think that I'm kind of trying to make it being stone plaque as sort of a satire with the hasty carving. So it's definitely some cheap Chinese stone, like quote marble unquote.
Yeah, it's the Megadeth version of stone.
Yes, yeah, and maybe it's even painted, like the letters are painted with this really fake leaf gold.
But on a kind of pastel turquoise background.
Yeah, and next to it there is actually this chisel, and that you can actually chisel to the board itself, the plaque itself.
Yeah, and the handle of the chisel is in black and white leopard fur print.
Yes, yeah, like say, now we're like this perspective is interesting because these meanings start to contribute again in a very different way, but like certainly are contributing to the whole, which is it's really interesting, this possibility of moving between these two, because you could say that this is kind of very metaphorical, but I think metaphorical is highly operative, functional, fertile, call it whatever.
Yeah,
And but it's kind of creating meaning, commentary, associations around like the modes, but in a very different way than, say, if we were writing the modes in a definition manner or as rules, and they're all kind of rich in their own way.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't this just a kind of prime example of layering what we just did?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is, I think this is highly promising.
Mm-hmm.
My video has crashed again. I have problems with both my camera and Zoom now, but hopefully you two agree at least on some level. But I do think, like, structurally it's highly promising, and it's kind of validating certain things like this perspectivism and the layer filter as why they are, what's kind of powerful in them.
Yeah, this was great. This last description of the dungeon was great. I mean, atmospheric context for ideas seems very promising.
Yeah, and it's always available. You can also facet it off, but you can, or you can even make a game, so to speak, where you walk it first as a game board and then you walk it as a dungeon, and then you see what you have. Like, that's another way of facet things out of this range of possibilities.
My computer's actually running low on battery and I don't have a charger, so
I think we're finishing.
Yeah.
I will stop sharing. I will, goodbye people, if you exist. Ta-da. That was, yeah, but
You're still recording though.
yes, okay, so this is even more awkward. So goodbye people again, because I pressed stop share screen, but I will actually stop the